take your picture in your phone?
Yeah, yeah,
If
sure.
you want it, I can do it for you now.
Yeah, right, okay. Yeah, maybe over here.
Shy, come forward. Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
I'm just nervous about this.
No, no, you're fine. I'll be good.
I'll put it on the table. Or maybe someone can bring some water at some point.
Yeah, can get that. Yeah. So welcome to those of you who are in the room and those of you who are arriving, but also welcome to those of you who are joining us online as we live stream this evening's talk as well. We've gathered here in the Grand Hall at St Martin's House, adjacent to Leicester Cathedral. The cathedral is closed at the moment for major restoration works. Normally we'd be gathered over there. But it's good to gather here. It's probably warmer over here, actually. And there are more accessible toilets as well, which is a good thing. The Far and Near lecture is an annual talk here at Leicester Cathedral. And it emerged out of the Far and Near Club, which was a club that used to gather in Leicester with the Bishop of Leicester in particular, and would gather people from different parts of life in the city and the county, and often would engage with thinkers and speakers on a whole variety of subjects of mutual concern. The club folded, like all things that had its moment and its time, but there was a little bit of money left over from the days of the club, which has gone on to found this annual talk and allowed us to bring somebody to Leicester to speak to us about different subjects, the sort of subjects that the Far and Near Club would have also engaged with. So thank you to them for the resources to allow us to do this. I'm really pleased to welcome Zara Mohammed this evening to Leicester. You know, we even allow people from Scotland here. We're not very fussy. I'm allowed to say that with some Scottish heritage. So, but very good to welcome you from the Muslim Council of Britain, and of course, well known by your face and your lovely accent and voice as well, speaking around issues concerning public life, diversity, the Muslim community here in this country. And of course, the cathedral has a long story and a long history of working in partnership with many people of different faiths here in the city, not least working with the Muslim community, with the FMO and various other mosques and communities around the city. I'm struck that often in the predicaments and challenges that we face as a society, ranging from climate change to economy to racism and anti-racism to society and cohesion, almost in every sphere, the question is asked about the kind of leadership needed to address this complex situation we find ourselves in. And from what I know of you from the public discourse, one of the things, Zara, you really contribute to is this whole business about what it means to be a leader and a young leader and a woman leader and a Muslim leader and all those other things we could say. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from you as you reflect on your life and role and witness, and particularly amongst that on how you are discovering the kind of leadership that might be needed in the world that we live in. So Zara's going to speak to us for about half an hour, and then we're going to have some questions, Q&A, so we can engage with her then. So a big Leicester welcome to Zara Mohammed.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and it's lovely to be in Leicester again. Thank you for letting the Scots in, really appreciate it. I'm very proud of my Glaswegian background and accent, and Leicester is a place that I have been able to visit a few times, and one that always leaves me with things to do, things to think about, and lots of people to love. So hopefully, I think in this evening's lecture, which I'm really honored to be here to present to you all, I want to share a little bit about my story and precisely that point of, what have I learned so far and how has my journey in leadership actually helped me understand how do we address some of the hardest things that are facing us. I think the podium height is okay. You can see me. I'm a little bit small. Okay, great. And I think there's people online, so I won't move too much. So I want to begin at the beginning. And that is the moment that my life changed. And a year and 11 months ago, Muslim communities decided to make history. And they decided to elect a 29-year-old from Glasgow as their first ever female, youngest, and first Scots Secretary General. And the news went crazy. So within about 15 minutes, I became a public figure. And I didn't quite understand what I was getting myself into until I was averaging 9 interviews a day. I was on the front page of The Times, Guardian. I was on every broadcast channel, newspaper, trending on the BBC. My Twitter following increased quite dramatically. And I had to kind of deal with this new reality of being a leader, which was that everybody was on me, like the camera was on me. And aside from all of that, I was elected during a pandemic. So I couldn't actually meet anybody. I couldn't see the people who had elected me, and I was more or less at home in between Zoom sessions and with photographers in the garden at a safe distance taking pictures. And so in that week, and it was a very, very challenging week, I also had one of my most notable interviews, which I'm quite famous for, unfortunately, and that was on Women's Hour. And that probably woke me up to the reality of what this kind of being a Muslim woman in a leadership role in present-day Britain was going to be like. And so the premise of that interview was, it's going to be friendly, it was going to be a conversation, they really just wanted to get, wow, what an achievement. And as soon as the interview started, it took a very dramatic turn. And it wasn't about the achievement, it wasn't about me, it was about tropes, about Muslim communities, it was about what are you doing about this, what are you doing about that. It was an attack, essentially. And I remember a lot of people say, oh, Zara, you were very calm. So if those of you watched it, you were very calm. I kind of had that deer in the headlights look for about a second, and then I realized, okay. And I remember during the interview, so you couldn't see it, there was a Zoom room of ladies all watching me. I remember thinking, it's day 4 since I've been elected. I've got this really hostile interview now happening. I know this is not about me answering the question, but this is about creating a storyline. So how do I want to respond? And at that moment, I thought about the people I was responsible to, the people that had voted me in, and what they wanted from this new leader. Did they want a defensive, aggressive, rebuttal? Would it change anything? Did I want this to be a defining moment? No, I didn't. So I gritted my teeth a bit, and I was calm, and I responded as well as I could. And in that interview sparked a big national conversation around how does the media treat British Muslims? And in that week, I learned that whilst I was in some ways an exciting, progressive change, something really different, the narratives around Muslims hadn't really changed. People were asking me, do you think it's okay for young girls to not wear scarves? What do you think about homophobia? What do you think about terrorism? It went on and on and on. I thought, okay, I think we should stop. So after a week of onslaught of everything FAQ Muslim, I said stop. And it woke me up to the reality that this role wasn't going to be easy because I was coming at a point of change. Not only were we in a pandemic, people were in awful situations, Muslim communities disproportionately impacted, over 44,000 in the NHS and medical services. Some of the biggest communities impacted, people losing up to 16 family members. So I've got a community that's struggling, but I've also got this wider narrative of who are Muslims in Britain? Are they part of society? And then myself being third generation, born in this country, raised, educated, also saying, well, really? Are we still talking about this? Can't we move on? So I knew that I was going to be up against it, and that my responsibility, my role in this leadership journey wasn't just to be a representative for Muslim communities, but it was to challenge narratives. It was to redefine who it means to be Muslim, to be British and Muslim, but also it was about the state of leadership. And how do we create a leadership where it doesn't matter what your background is, your faith is, your gender, but actually we're a force of good for everybody. And so I remember in the pandemic, people said there was a lot of young students who were really just left behind. And if it wasn't for the churches, the gurdwaras, the mosques and the temples, we wouldn't have eaten. If it wasn't for faith communities, we just wouldn't have had anywhere to go to or a community to belong to, because many people were left behind. And so it was a really interesting time to be elected, but it was also an important time to remember that faith plays a huge role in the kind of change that we can create and the kind of change that we want to be part of. And so I thought I would share maybe like 3 key overarching parts of my story, and then we can kind of take it to some Q&A. And people always say, what's it like being the first woman? And what I would say is that, look, it's already difficult enough being different, but probably the hardest thing was being the youngest person in the room, being the youngest person in the organization and the boss. And actually I remember one of my first visits, restrictions eased, was to Leicester with the delightful FMO who hosted me. And I remember, well, you won't know this, but I was very nervous. And, we had this huge community meeting, actually, which was organized. I always insist, wherever I go, I want to meet the women, and then I want to meet the heavyweights. I remember Abdul Karim, we had this meeting in the mosque. I was sitting on the chair, everybody was sitting on the floor of the mosque. And I was thinking, oh my God, I feel like this is one of my first judgments. This is one of the big ones. Because Leicester and the communities in Leicester are part of our founding members. So there's some of the oldest pioneers, activists, leaders. And so I really had to kind of prove myself here. So sitting there thinking, right, 2.5 hours later, there's a lot of questions, because my track record in the organization and in community work was still really, really young compared to a lot of people. But my confidence and my ability to think that I could do it was unwavering. And what I learned in that Leicester engagement and those engagements that we did, and really thank you, because I had both of these sitting next to me on either side. What I learned from that is that, I had a strategy, I threw the strategy away after that visit, because I realized that good leadership required for me to listen to communities. And I had to understand, where are communities today? And so the way that the MCB works is we're this vast umbrella, we're diverse, we're representative all over the country, over 500 members, within that lots of members. But with COVID, everybody felt more disconnected than ever before. And there was no connection. We literally had lost 2 to 3 years of people talking and meeting. But also, I'm like the new kid. And they're all wondering, okay, who is this girl that they have elected? Who is this young lady that they've elected? And what is she all about? And so I spent 1.5 years touring the entire country. And this is one of the first lessons that I wanted to share with you, which is the power of listening and the power of basing our change on lived reality. So Blackburn, Leicester, Liverpool, Manchester, up at Aberdeen as well, all over London, Leeds, Wales. I went to 3 days, Swansea, Newport, Cardiff. I mean, you name it, I've probably been there. Bristol, love Bristol, that was good. So I went all over the country. And I always made sure that I didn't just go to our members, but I went to the mosque community leaders, charities, young people, women's groups, disabled groups, all the different parts of our community, even individuals, the business networks, and I asked them, so tell me, how is it? What's it like to be Muslim today? What is your experiences? And quite frankly, you know, some of the biggest issues that we're facing in our time are probably to do with the erosion of our society and of community itself, of the family. And because we live in a changing world in which you don't really need to have physical friends, you can just have digital ones. You don't actually need to belong to a community organization, you can just create your own one. And people are very isolated, they're very lonely. But families are very disintegrated. So the unit of the community and family is very, very fragile. And so people are looking to institutions. They're looking to faith communities. They're looking to you. And they're hoping for a place to belong to. And in my journey and travels, I found that, you know, social deprivation all over the UK, child poverty, mental health, people are suffering, people are isolated, crime, you know, Muslim communities are in the 40% most deprived communities in the UK, and COVID latent health inequalities. But on the flip side, over 1,400 Muslims in this country are millionaires, some of the most affluent. We have young people now attaining even higher, and of all of that, Muslim women are killing it. They're doing a really great job in political representation, in business, in sports, you know. We've had a lot of firsts. I know I'm one of them, but a lot of firsts. And so what that listening exercise taught me is that whilst there were lots of challenges on the outside, what was so wonderful to see what was happening on the inside, and that was the spirit of lived community, contribution of our faith communities all across. When we went to Batley and Dewsbury, a beautiful interfaith charity that was feeding up to 500 families a week, an incredible amount. They just came together, there was no organization. They said, look, we've got some space, we've got some food, shall we go do something about it? And they're still going today. You know, we found, there's also like a priest versus imams football situation up there too. But what communities across the country were doing is they weren't waiting. They were providing that urgent support. They were coming together and realizing that people were in need of help. You know, there were imams that told me that, you know, like Ramadan, for example, we'd never experienced a Ramadan at home, you know, the first lockdown. People just did not know what to do. But at the same time, you know, the mosques weren't closed. They were feeding people. They were making sure people were welcome, and same with other faith communities. So one thing that I found is that the power and resilience of our communities is really quite unbelievable. And whether it's in COP or in mental health, we have an important voice to play in that. And so any such strategy didn't really work unless I knew people. And the second big lesson that I learned is dealing with all the fire. How do you deal with constantly being up against firefighting? And so in my role, we're constantly firefighting. In my term alone, we dealt with or had to respond to 2 terror attacks, you know, say national pandemic, international crisis, local crisis, a lot of different crises happening. And I remember 10 p.m. Cobra meetings, evening meetings, you know, and I'm literally the one having to offer leadership to everybody. It's considerably older than me, in these completely unknown situations. What are we going to do, Zara? What do we do? Everybody's looking at me, thinking, oh my God, what should we do about this situation? And that's when I realized that actually leadership is about trusting yourself, trusting your gut, and also the power of the team. And knowing that you're not going to be able to overcome these incredibly difficult situations taking it on yourself. But at the same time, don't doubt your ability and your voice. And part of the challenge of being a young leader is you have a lot of people giving you a lot of advice all the time, which is great up until the point you get overwhelmed by it. And so I think one of the other challenges I really had was to make sure that I was listening to my own voice as well as bringing other voices forward. And so when we had these terror attacks happening, you know, there was an extreme anxiety and panic within the community. Here we go again. Are we going to be labeled? And I remember thinking to myself, Zara, you signed up for this. So when the news comes that you're in that bed, you're going to have to respond to this story. And you've got to really consider that from a perspective, how unbelievably difficult and challenging it is for Muslim communities that when something bad happens on the news, we have to go on public television and respond to that. And so I remember thinking, well, you know what? We've got nothing to apologize for. So yeah, we will respond and be very dismissive and, very concrete about our position there. But I also remember speaking to communities on the ground, whether it was Liverpool or David Amos, Southend. As soon as these attacks happens, there was vandalism on mosques, hate crime increased, policing had to increase, classes had to be closed, especially young people's classes. And so it reminded me again of the challenge ahead of us, because last year marked 20 years since 9/11. And 20 years of a shadow that was cast on Muslim communities of suspicion and suspect. And I think, again, at this point where we're saying, no, that's not what we're about. That's not what this is about. And actually, we can't allow that narrative to continue to define us. And so those are very, very difficult moments. And again, I think we had to look back to faith as a source of strength and as a source of confidence. And then I think dealing with the fire and learning how to deal with media or panic or crisis was really about trusting the people around you and trusting the people that can support you. And the best thing about the MCB is that it's a network of support. It's built on the strength and power of communities. And I think the third biggest area that I learned about, probably the hardest thing that I'm trying to figure out how to deal with, is how do you cope as a leader? How do you actually cope? There's no manual to this stuff. Nobody actually says, right, here's the book, here's the training course, and here's the helpline when you need support. When you're the youngest person, so as it stands, there's actually nobody like me that I have found. There's no reference point. All my predecessors averaged about 55 years old, all lovely, all respect and look up to. None of them are women. So there isn't anybody else that I can relate to that has done what I've done. So whilst that is hugely liberating and exciting on one front, because I get to be the trailblazer or the pioneer, but the other side of that is, where is your reference point? The scrutiny on me is 10 times anybody else. The questions of why. If I have an opinion, well, but why? Are you sure? The questions, the accountability is stronger. The media lens is stronger. My own self-doubt and imposter syndrome is stronger. And so there's this kind of recurring theme. And I remember when I got elected, the level of anxiety was unreal. Not because anybody was making me anxious, but because I couldn't believe how much of a spotlight was on me. And I thank my parents, fed me, dropped food off and made sure I was eating. But I remember when I was doing 9 interviews a day, I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't eating, and I had this feeling that I had to take it all on myself, carry the weight of my shoulders. And, as I've gone on this journey, I realized that all of us have been imbued with a gift. God's given us all a gift, and it's about sharing that gift. And no one of us is going to change all of it or fix it all or find a way to make it all suddenly better. But I think all of us have an important role to play in all of our individual spheres of influence. So when I got to that point where I was one of many burnouts, as we do in this work, I remember thinking to myself, and someone gave me some really good advice, if a leader doesn't take care of themselves, they're not really any good to anybody else. So if you're not taking care of yourself, what good are you to the world? And I remember moments of doubt and hesitation. Another great friend said, but Zara, you're going to do the right thing, aren't you? Are you going to do the right thing? And I think that got me the most, that floored me, the most powerful and potent question I got asked by my mother. What have you It was like 4 months in, she asked me that. Oh, God, Mom. I remember in Wales, actually, it was a lovely primary school in Cardiff, and when the kids got to Q&A with the kids, that was tough. And one of them said, so, are you proud of yourself? gosh. I was it's a lot to unpack in that question. And think of the craziest things. And so I think throughout my whole journey, moments of reflection were so important. Moments of understanding what it requires to be a good, great, thoughtful, humble, servant leader was all about introspection, but also learning from those around me, but also learning that my journey was just going to be different. Like if it's easy, then you're obviously not doing the right thing. The path is going to be challenging. If it's not hard, it's not worth. It's not going to be long term and lasting. And part of our reflections as MCB hits its 25-year anniversary this year, and this month actually, is looking ahead at what does the next 25 years look like for British Muslims. Our philosophy at the MCB is creating a just and cohesive society for all. It's not just about Muslim communities. And so as we're looking ahead and looking at the kind of leadership we want, the kind of communities that we want to thrive, we have to consider what is our vision. We are in a Britain right now that is really struggling. People are going through the toughest cost of living crisis. There's just so many miserable things. I don't need to mention them all here. You get it. But in all of that, we're still seeing a lot of great stuff happen. We're seeing people rise up and challenge or find ways to. The MCB supporting the Warm Welcome campaign, which is places of worship providing a warm welcome, which is really wonderful. So I don't have any doubt in our ability to overcome it. But I think the question we have to ask ourselves is what's going to be our role in it? And in our faith, we're taught that it's not necessarily the outcome that's important, but the effort and who you become in the process. And so you could be saying you're doing this work for God, you're doing this work for faith, and all of those nice things. But ultimately, you have to ask yourself, who have I become in this process? Because it's easy to get lost. It's easy to find a road that you didn't actually ask for, because parts of the role can be very glamorous and, oh, look at me, power and influence. Parts of the role can make you want to give up because it's hard going and we've got to please a lot of people. That's hard. And parts of this role are incredibly challenging because you just don't have control. You just can't change things. And people, I remember a lecture I spoke at where someone said, but don't you just feel it's hopeless? Isn't it all just too hard? I said, if that was the case, what would we be doing here then? We just give up now. But there is a genuine feeling of despondence. I think people feel like it's hard. It is hard. What I hoped that my election represented, what me going crazy and touring around the country represented, what this moment can represent, is a renewal of our strength and vigor that actually there's so much more to come. There's so much more to look forward to, and that actually our faith inspires courage and bravery for us to go forward and do that. But the best part of it all is that we don't need to do it alone. So in that, I hope that these small reflections that I've shared with you have been useful. And I guess my best learning is that to be a good leader or a great leader not only requires listening and connecting, not only requires confidence and faith, but also requires the importance of bringing people together, diverse people, diverse communities, and remembering what does unite us. And I think in that celebration of interfaith is that we can use our collective power to overcome division, hatred, but also to inspire a lot of love in society. Thank you.
Well, we're going to use the roving mic in just a moment, but before that, Zara, thank you ever so much for that really lively and authentic talk that you've just done. It struck me, a number of us from the cathedral here with other cathedrals were in Manchester 2 weeks ago thinking about leadership in cathedrals, and you could have easily given that talk at that conference because just strikes me the commonalities in all our search for that. I want to pick up, this is a bit of a rambling, it's not a well-formed question, but I want to pick up on the young people piece. Because I think one of the reflections we're all having more generally, but particularly also in Leicester at the moment, is the connection between our young people and our leadership, or in a number of cases, the disconnection between our young people and our leadership. And particularly in faith communities where wisdom and age is valued, and rightly so, and to be respected. But I guess in all our communities, we're struggling to really listen well to young people and to really understand how we can raise up leadership in and with young people. And I wonder, from the listening and so on you've done, whether you have any further reflections about that.
Yeah, well, really good question. I mean, I think that's such an important one, and one that we were also dealing with ourselves. I mean, 50% of Muslims in this country are under the age of 25. So we have an incredibly young population. And I think one thing that we have to be honest about is the relevance of our institutions. So what young people say is, look, we don't feel like we belong. We don't feel like we connect. You're not in the places that we're in. You're not speaking the language that we're speaking. You're not digital. You're not accessible. But also, the dynamic with young people has changed from one of demanding respect from them to one of equal partnership. So what young people say to me is, well, what's in it for me? Why should I? Why do I need to listen? I can have more followers than the Imam, right? So I think my advice is that, you really need to listen to young people if you want to connect with them, because they've got lots of options now. And the way they see their faith identity is so much more diverse than the traditional model. Actually, they can be faithful. They don't need to belong to an institution. They don't need to belong to a community. They can practice privately. And we're already in a society in which faith can be uncool. And so the great thing that COVID did was digitize faith so that people could connect from lots of different places. But I think the biggest thing is giving young people respect and responsibility, giving them a place, and not just in the youth committee, but actually at the table. And so one of the different dynamics is, obviously I'm a very young person at the top of the table, and so when people talk about young people, I can input in that discussion. But I think it's so important now, and we speak ourselves, those that elected me understood that we were at a really important time of change within our communities. If we didn't connect now, we would lose generations. And I think it's the same for all faith communities. So I think you have to actively listen, actively have programs on. Don't make it faith-centered, make it humanitarian, charitable, academic, science. Use other things that bring people together. But most importantly, give young people responsibility, recognition, development. So it's not just you burn them out with their volunteering. But I think that if they can see that there's a mentor or a role model or someone who's going to help them in life, then that's definitely a better way. And obviously social media is pretty important too. You've got to have a digital footprint.
Sounds like you've just mapped out the chapters of your next book.
How to connect.
So, over to the floor. They'll all go shy initially here. David's coming around with the microphone. If you could just say who you are, where you're from, kind of thing, so we know.
Thank you very much, Zara. My name's Malcolm Cook from Rothley Parish Church and Loughborough University. Thank you very much for your talk. I want to pick up on the point about labelling and the aspiration to become a more inclusive society, and wondered what your views were on where we are in that journey in terms of becoming a more integrated, cohesive society across multiple faiths.
Yeah, okay, great point. Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting because the demographics of diverse communities obviously grow. So the census is going to come out. So particularly with Muslim communities, I think with all diverse communities, the number has increased. I think diversity and equality, diversity and inclusion, they're big things we all want to do, we've all kind of adopted. The challenge is the reality of the government's recent statistics on religiously motivated hate crime. So hate crime against faith communities that found 40% of all hate crime was targeting Muslim communities, and different minorities within that. So on one hand, we've got evidently more diverse communities and a commitment from corporates, organizations all over the shop that we're doing diversity. On the other hand, we have a rise in hate crime, and we have political narratives that continue to perpetuate stereotypes. There was some government legislation that targeted even the Gypsy Roma traveller community, you know. So it's lots of different, I mean, Rwanda, deportation of refugees, you know, so there's lots of, so I think there's a middle ground in which everyday people are doing their best to get to know, to bring together and to develop cohesive societies. I think that's an active and honest effort, and we benefit from that diversity every day. But I think at a political level, there is a dedicated and very hostile kind of approach to keep that, pit groups off each other, keep things divided. And then I think there's still a culture of ignorance. People just don't know, they don't understand. Some willing, some unwilling. So this month is also Islamophobia Awareness Month. So I do lots of kind of events and stuff, and people are, well, does it really exist? Is it really a thing? You know, can you have a phobia? And, you know, or people have just never met someone different. There are places in the UK where people have never met a diverse person. You know, they have no idea. You know, there's no kind of, they never lived in a diverse city. So I think part of the challenge is where it's good and it's working, avoiding it becoming a tick box exercise. And so one of the questions we always ask employers and corporates is, okay, do you just talk about diversity in a week? Or is there a real culture of diversity? Are people okay to feel different? I spoke to, I won't say which public agency, but they were saying, oh, you know, we've got Taj and he's just like everybody else, he's normal, he's one of us. I thought, God, what does that mean, you know? So there's, I think we're on the journey still. Things are definitely much better. There's definitely more allyship, there's definitely more recognition. People are against racism, people are against discrimination on a whole. But there are parts of society, parts of politics, parts of media, people that profit from division, and I think that's where our challenge is. But I think faith communities have continued to be a force of good on this, despite all the attempts at dividing us. We have maintained that, especially communities like here in Leicester, where it's long-standing relationships all over the UK. So yeah, I think it's a work in progress, but parts of it are great and parts of it are in need of a bit more work.
Very helpful, thank you.
Zara, thank you very much. My name's Nigel Rooms. I live in Leicester. You started the talk by saying that your story began when you got elected, but I'm really curious to how you got elected. Because let me tell you that in the Church of England, I suggested to a bishop once that we should start electing our bishops. You should have heard the intake of breath. So how did it happen? How did this organisation that, as you say, had worked with 55-year-olds up forever, do that?
I think that's a great question, and I think I answered it so many times I forgot to answer it today. Yeah, I think, so pre-election, obviously it's the pandemic, and election season's coming up, and I remember talk begins. So I was already part of the leadership team for about 2 years. So I was in a member organisation, student organisation, but I was a small fish guy. It's like, no, you know, I had no aspiration for this either. So talk began. Someone said, what do you think? I said, you're crazy? You're absolutely crazy. What do you mean, what do I think? Who is going to elect me? And also, I was up against an imam, a very famous imam, very well known, like 20, 30 years on me, very well, you know, it's like a celebrity really in our community. And so I thought it was crazy too, if I'm honest. But when I start calling people, there was a real appetite for change, in all honesty. I think many of the people I spoke to said, look, you know, we built these institutions, but our young girls don't feel like they have a place. Our young people don't feel like they have a place. We need someone who is British born, who's articulate, that can speak this language, can understand it. Obviously I did have a track record in the organisation, a small one, but nonetheless still a track record. And I think a giant leap of faith. And I remember, so you know, we had hustings, live TV hustings, Zoom hustings. You know, it was, getting elected was hard work because a lot of people didn't know me, and it was a lot of kind of confidence and trust building. And I remember when I did get elected, which was just a profound moment. Majority men in mosques that did vote for me. I did BBC Live at 6 p.m. that day. It was a quick interview, but I remember doing it, and straight away, good, this is why we elected you. So they get like, okay, thank God we elected you. So they got instant feedback. So I think whilst Muslim communities have this reputation, we have evolved so much within ourselves, and that diversity comes through in both gender representation, ethnic representation, but also I think in a desire to realise when is it important. So I mean, that's my explanation for it. Obviously, these guys have voted for me. But yeah, I think there's definitely some miracle in there too. But yeah, I mean, I think like we've discussed, I think communities understood this was a really important point. And they could go for a change, or they could go for something that they were more, familiar with. So yeah, they did it. Here we are.
My name's Janet Arthur. Zara, thank you very much, and good luck with your continuing role. And I just wanted to ask you, I'm a member of maybe others, a Christian Muslim ladies group in Leicester. And I have a very good friend at the University of Leicester, and he works in the Vice-Chancellor's office, and he's an Ahmadi Muslim. And I was talking to him about a recent meeting, and he said, I've been to the mosque. He said, what do you think that's something my wife could come to? And I said, I didn't know how to answer that question. It completely caught me off the hop. And I was thinking afterwards, I have no idea what brand of Christianity the other ladies in this group are. They might be Methodist or Baptist or Congregational or Quaker. They might even be Unitarian, which, is not Trinitarian, and some people don't think is proper Christian. And I just wondered, you talk about Muslim communities. And I just wondered whether you are able to embrace Sunni, Shia, Ahmadi, Dawoodi Bohra, the whole pattern of Muslim communities that we have in Leicester. If that's the future.
Yeah, no, great question. So, I mean, we're a membership-based organisation, so we have constitutional requirements so we represent Sunni and Shia faith traditions. And part of our constitution has prerequisites on who we define to be a Muslim, and that's where the Ahmadiyya community doesn't fulfill that requirement, nor can we fulfill their requirement of what it means to be Ahmadiyya. So this is a subject that we have broached, but it's based on, because we're not an organisation that claims to represent every Muslim in the country, nor could we, because people don't want to be represented by us, in their entirety. And we have that everywhere, right? People are diverse. Well, who do you represent? You don't represent me. So the model that we adopted in the UK was a membership-based model. So you opt in. If you want to be part of our umbrella and family, you opt in. And part of that opting in is also, do you adopt our membership criteria, which is belief in one God and finality of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And then within that, we have the most diverse range of backgrounds, theologies, ethnicities, and all the rest of it. But on the theological point, this is the one that therefore differentiates those other kinds of branches or communities. And I should also note that the Ahmadiyya community has never asked us to represent them, because they have their own representation. So that's just on the Ahmadiyya point. But I think the way that I see inclusion and diversity is, ultimately, people are going to face Islamophobia, whether they're Muslim or not. Sikhs face Islamophobia, Hindus face Islamophobia. No one's going to label that. And so in our work, we're tackling discrimination and hatred towards all communities. And I said this in an interview in which someone asked me about the Ahmadis. I said, well, irrespective of our position on that, we're totally against hate and the espousal of hate or attacking of any community, and our work does embody that. But from a theological point of view, we have to be clear what we represent and what we don't represent. But you can have an agree to disagree approach, right? We don't need to have, so just because not everybody can be part of the family doesn't mean our work can't continue to benefit wider society. So I think inclusion and diversity is that you continue to benefit all of society in the best way that you can, whilst maintaining your respective tradition and theology. So that's my response to that one.
It's interesting that I often find it much easier to be in partnership and dialogue with other faiths than I necessarily do within the church itself. For the same sort of kind of thing goes on. So I kind of recognize that.
I think it's very much like the different sects that you have within the Islamic.
Yeah.
So you have Jehovah's Witnesses, and there are other groups like that.
Yeah.
And these are theological issues, and that is why the position that I maintain very clearly is that, as Zara has pointed out actually, that it's a membership organization, same with the FMO actually. And hence, we need to be absolutely clear about certain theological issues that people have the differences about, and abide by that. And so,
yeah, and also it's within our own families, our extended families, are often some of the most difficult conversations, aren't there?
Absolutely.
And it's the same sort of thing there as well, that, you know, with a shared inheritance in the past, it's often quite difficult to have those more internal, even though they're differentiated. Yeah. An online question. David. Gosh, we're very technologically savvy this evening.
Yeah, I thought I'd look and see if anyone had asked a question, and they had. A question from Deep S. What are your views on why and how there is pressure from Muslim leaders to show more patriotism to the UK and be apologists for bad actors who happen to be Muslim? How do we tackle this?
Can you repeat it for me, sorry?
Yeah, what are your views on why and how there is pressure from Muslim leaders to show more patriotism to the UK and be apologists for bad actors who happen to be Muslim? How do we tackle this?
Yeah, so I think the question is basically alluding to moments in which Muslim communities feel like they need to justify why a terror attack isn't in the name of Islam, or, you know, why we're more British, or, you know, okay, so I get it. I mean, look, part of this is people forget Muslim communities are still very young communities. They're about 40 years old, you know, in terms of settled and in their generational set. But whilst they're young communities, they're basically in the political eye of the storm, you know, so they are communities in which are heavily politicized. And so I think part of it is challenging the narrative on who Muslims are defined to be versus who we actually are. And I think the best way we do that is engaging in public life, actually engaging in wider society, being part of politics and policy and media and journalism, but also in building our communities and having young people come forward and represent. And I think it's just going to be a work in progress. I mean, you know, 20 years ago was 9/11, and we know how that felt. That felt very different from today. Today feels very different from what it will be in 20 years again. So I think we have a unique opportunity here to, you know, some people say it shouldn't just be about contribution. Being a good citizen shouldn't just be because we contributed a lot. Otherwise, everybody would have to contribute a lot to be a good citizen, right? Not everybody. So not everybody's given that test. Whereas we are often framed as, oh, they're good citizens because they do a lot of good work. No, we're just like everybody else, right? So citizenship itself, there is a bit of a double standard. But I think part of that is, you know, allyship with wider society. Part of that is about engaging. But part of it is recognizing that it's not going to change overnight, that it's going to be a work in progress, because the best spokespeople for Muslims are not Muslims. Actually, the best spokespeople are people like you in this room who are like, well, that's not right, you know. The bystanders, the other people in the room, the audience, the ones that those headlines are going to, the ones, you know, in the conversation where someone's saying, oh, you know, oh, look at these Muslims. Well, no, actually, that's not right. Don't think you should be saying that, you know. So I think it's so important that it's society that speaks up for how we want our society to be, not looking at the headlines. but recognizing that it is an upward battle and we will figure it out.
Emma Davis, I work at the Cathedral here. I wondered about faith in the public square. Too often in our politics, to admit to have faith in God is actually pushed out. It's considered as something somehow lesser, and that reason and other things need to take precedence in making laws. I wonder if you have a view about whether that's an issue and how we can actually, as people of faith, own our faith in God in the public square.
Yeah, no, so important, this question. It's interesting that I found, although it seems like wider society doesn't want to deal with religion, it's also obsessed with it. You know, we are politicized, so I think it's money, politics, and religion, right? Or the economics, money, politics. So you'll find every story, you know, and stories of religion are really, really politicized, you know. So whilst people are like, faith communities, you know, they're always coming to us for a statement or a story. You know, there's always a huge focus on faith, but how that's done is usually through a negative lens rather than a positive one. And I think what was really interesting about my election was they struggled. They didn't know what to do with it. And we had far-right think tanks who called us backward, male-dominated, repressive, now attacking me, the youngest, first female woman who's espousing, you know, let's be diverse and inclusive. Oh no, but she's also supports extremists. So okay, well, what do you want then, you know? So I think it's kind of realizing that actually the best way to do it is to do it, to be actively part of the space, to own the space, to be engaged critically, and to keep showing that value critically as well. And that requires, I think, a collective approach between faith communities. I think that requires challenge to those narratives and tropes. But I think it also requires, you know, where faith communities have done really, really well is in taking care of society. I think that can't be undervalued. I think the lifeline that faith communities provide, given how difficult things are for people, cannot be undermined, because that in itself shows the role of faith, not just as social support, but as hope, as real source of hope for people and as a real source of community. So I think all of us have to, in our respective spaces, continue to engage and to continue to be part of that and not to be frightened. And I think there's lots of political topics that can be very challenging on society's norms and how they change, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, how does religion view this? And so when we get asked some of these questions, this is our theological position, but it doesn't mean we're against communities that have different views from us. It means that just as in a pluralistic society, just as we wish to be respected, we also respect others' choices and views and beliefs. So I think it's not letting it be like a negative us or them, or look, they're all backward over there, but saying, no, actually, human rights is rooted in religion. Yeah, morality is rooted in religion. Social care and provision, housing, healthcare, what the church is doing with social, you know, homelessness, and, you know, so there's so many things that people wouldn't even appreciate that happen today in society as a result of the good work of faith communities. Maybe they need to be reminded.
Maybe one last question. Oh.
We can take them both, and then
we can take them both,
and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Except I've got two questions.
Oh no!
George, you're greedy.
I'd really like to thank you for that contribution as a fellow Glaswegian. I first became involved in interfaith activity in Glasgow in 1979 when I was 19 years old. But I've spent half my life living here in Leicester. And I think there are two very different expressions of interfaith living. The Leicester way is very different from the Glasgow way. I don't want to see which I consider superior. But the question I've got to ask you is, do you think there's anything distinctively Glaswegian that you brought before your election and that you would bring to the post that you're in now? The second question is, you've mentioned this being Islamophobia Awareness Month. I haven't heard you say anything about it being Interfaith Week, both in England and Scotland. I don't think this activity was labelled an Interfaith Week thing. It's just a kind of coincidence.
I think it happens quite nice.
But Interfaith Week is a very disappointing event from my point of view. We used to, the very first time it was held, we had 52 events in a week in Leicester. Now we've got about 4 or 5. And there's, some communities throw themselves right into it, but the larger minority communities don't really get involved in any meaningful... There's nothing put on as an Interfaith Week event. So that's the two things then. Is there something distinctively Glaswegian that you think you can bring to the post? And what can be done to entice the communities which are not getting involved in Interfaith Week into it?
Okay, great. I mean, I think my whole self is what I bring to it. The Glaswegian in me. I mean, the best thing that I learned about being born and raised in Glasgow is humility. So you know when you land back in Glasgow airport, it doesn't matter who you are, how big the position you are. People are very, very grounded and they're very, very open. And so when I meet communities across the UK, it doesn't matter how different they are from me, what they believe in, but I think I'm always grounded because there's a real sense of like Glaswegian spirit is about being humble and being open to everybody. Like a smile doesn't cost you anything, right? So I think that natural spirit and warmth that the city has, I always like to bring that. So when I go back to Glasgow, I'm just a normal person, whatever, not big position. And I think that keeps me humble to the fact that, I'm here to do a service and I have a purpose to fulfill. So there's a role and responsibility. It's not just you're this big leader and you've got this big position and people are looking up to you. But I think staying very grounded. In terms of Interfaith Week, and I did mention it earlier, that it is part of Interfaith Week. We did a statement as well, and we're supporting national interfaith community activities all over the UK. I mean, I don't know necessarily what the root of the issue is, because COVID did knock a lot of stuff out. So you've got to take into account that people are just tired from COVID. So just getting stuff back on the programme, people are just really exhausted. So I don't want to excuse it, but I know part of it is down to the fact that we're out of practice. And then I think part of it is actually energising the communities again to want to do it. And that has to be, I think, rooted in a cause. And so with so much going on right now, that's why we joined the Warm Welcome campaign, cost of living crisis. So rather than just having more interfaith events to get to know one another, having interfaith events that are geared towards doing something together would be really powerful and engaging. I think if you think about it, communities have done so many interfaith events in their history and legacy. They've done it. It's probably wondering like, what next? So maybe there's scope and space for innovation to energize it again, because I think you have the usual panel discussions, lunches, teas, speech with Zara, all these different things. So I think perhaps, and maybe it's about bringing new people to the table as well. I found that in the interfaith scene it is usually the same old faces, and people get tired. And I found this in the kind of anti-racism space as well. In a conference I attended, and people look, it's the same people for 25 years in here. And that's where I think youth engagement and getting different and diverse groups together, women's groups, young people's groups, sports groups, So I think there's just a little bit more work to do, but yeah, we can forgive ourselves a little bit, and hopefully, if there's an appetite to do it, it'll get done. We're going to take your quick question and then...
Oh gosh, I'm not sure it's that quick actually, but anyway, first of all, thank you for coming, and secondly, I do hope you're proud of yourself, because I think it's obvious why you are where you are, and well done, and keep going, fantastic. I want to ask a question. Your travels around the country. Have you written a book? Are you going to write a book? I don't know. Have any of our bishops done the same? To go around the country? Because each community has different pressures and strains.
It's great. There's no time in my life right now to do too much, but that's definitely great. I should do it.
I think that would be really interesting. Yeah. It would be fascinating. And secondly, a really concrete question for us in Leicester. How do you see this relationship developing in Leicester in practice? Because this winter and the coming next 2 years are going to be terrible. Our health services are disintegrating, everything is falling apart because it's not being funded by government. How can we work best together as communities in Leicester to serve the poor, the needy, the mental health issues that we're going to face? Huge problems.
Yeah, I think this is totally at our doorstep. I think we've got to think beyond the present, so we've got to have a vision for it. And I think it's about creating a sustainable strategic plan in which everyone can play a role. I mean, look, at a fundamental level, people need support with their heating and gas. You've got some of these things. But at a wider level, you've got to look at where does that put people's opportunities and aspirations. So if they're in a climate in which things are really difficult, does that mean they're not going to pursue further education because they're like, oh, maybe I need to get a job and support the house? Or is it that their mental health is going to decline? So I think we need to look at wholesale, where is the need going to be and how can we alleviate it? So for example, faith communities can provide great pastoral care. They have lots of space. They can provide places for people to come, to talk. So you might not be able to solve the problem, but you can certainly provide a space to talk about the problem. And then I think there's got to be some advocacy and lobbying to the heart of power, right? General election coming up. Plenty to do. So if you want to get elected, you better sort this stuff out. So I think a bit of soft power and a bit of hard power is good. And mobilizing people, educating people, political literacy, still really low. Helping people understand that their vote and what they say and turning up to hustings and holding people to account is important. So I think there has to be a kind of an energizing piece to say, this is hard right now, but...
How can you give us an example? That's a great point. I fully believe that. The people we've got leading us aren't fit to lead, quite honestly. Because they're not interested in... They haven't got those visions. They haven't got those visions of a broader community, and therefore all they're interested in is, well, their own interest, I would say, very largely. So how do we get that political militancy, particularly in our young people, who are so alienated from our political institutions? How can we do that collectively? Because we are people of faith. We see the vision. We know where we want to go. We see a brighter hope.
I know. I'm gonna do it in a very concise way. I think we present a vision. All you need is 5 to 10 pledges. What are the changes we want to see, and get people mobilized around them. And I think that's a really simple way to start. But I think people are genuinely pretty frustrated and upset. So the emotion and passion is there. Just got to give them something constructive to mobilize around. Okay, I think we're done now, exhausted.
Thank you so much for being with us and for being so honest and straightforward in your answers. Over the years, I've attended more courses on being a leader than I've had a samosa in Leicester, which kind of tells you how many. And I probably haven't learned that much from many of them. But a few weeks ago, I read a book about leadership, which I thought was spot on. And the guy said that, from his perspective, leadership was 3 things. One was to listen so you could articulate the story and the vision, what you've just been talking about. And then he said there are 2 further things you need to do. One is to say thank you, and the other is to say sorry.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And I thought that was such a good summary.
That's my life.
Yeah, my life too. And all of us, I think, recognise anybody who steps into any space in the public realm recognises the opportunities of leadership, but also the real challenges at the cost to leadership as well. And we are incredibly grateful that you have taken on this challenge as friends and neighbours from Leicester. And as you continue your work, know that you've got a pile of people here rooting for you in what you do and helping to develop leadership across the communities at a time of great need. So thank you very much indeed. And go well. God bless.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. I know Zara will be going off to another engagement in a little while, but I'm sure there's a few moments afterwards. If you had a question for her or a comment you didn't want to raise publicly, then I'm sure she's around for a few moments afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you very
no,
much.
thanks everybody. Thanks so much. Should we take